We don't have to try any harder. We don't need to fight anymore. We don't have to try any harder, no.
Hey, Jacob.
Hi, Scott.
How are you today?
Well, slightly nervous. We're trying something new here where we're actually recording both our voices and our video. And
Oh, I
so,
wish you hadn't just reminded me of that.
well,
I'm going to
why,
be self-conscious of how I look.
why should I be the only one worried about how I look, how my mouth
You have a lot of
moves?
color, actually. You're looking very summery tan.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I hope that distracts from the fact that my mouth looks very strange when I talk. I mean, really strange. Like,
Was that a joke? Wait, does it really, or was that a joke?
well, I mean, it's probably a joke, but
Now you're going to be worried your mouth does look really strange when you talk.
especially if you remind me how weird my mouth looks when I talk. So I had something funny happen yesterday. I posted about it on Facebook, but I was up taking this great hike. I'd worked hard all day, and the weather finally turned really beautiful for a day, and um, I was hiking through this trail, and there were all these beautiful, like kind of an unusual number of wildflowers out with different colors. Usually, most of the wildflowers are just kind of yellow. So anyway, I was having a great hike, and then I hit my strain target, from my Whoop band. Said, "Hey, you've done enough." I'm like, "Oh, perfect. I'll meditate up here." So I found this flat rock, and it was almost sunset, and I was sitting there, and it was going really well. And all of a sudden, this is the only time of year I get pollen allergies, and so all of a sudden, I sneezed 3 times really hard. I had my shirt off, and then my abs cramped up very painfully. So I had to jump up, and there was a hiker way over there. And I jumped up, and I was like kind of wheezing and trying to stretch it out. But you know how it is when you get a cramp? You're like, this will never end. I mean,
You probably look so funny. I wish I could have seen it.
I don't like a monkey trying to meditate and then, got bit by an ant or something.
But you recovered eventually.
I did,
And you
I
have
didn't
tighter abs to show for it.
a little bit. They're still a little bit sore from that little workout.
That's crazy.
How have you been, my friend?
Um, I've been well, yeah, mostly well. Not too much to report. I'm gonna be I gave notice on the place where I'm living in Santa
Oh,
Fe, and we'll be moving out July 1st, and have a few different, like a couple different friends reached out to me as I was thinking about moving on from this place and finding a place here in Santa Fe that feels a little bit more in line with what I'm looking for. Like, this is
mm-hmm.
a great casita, but it's a bit more loft-like and open, and so the upstairs is just my bed floating in this big room. And I want something. I don't know, for sleeping, I like something that feels a little cozier.
Mm-hmm.
So, but a couple friends are going to be gone each for a month at a time, and asked me if I would be in their home because they don't want to leave their homes empty. So it's perfect. So I'll have some places to be while I'm looking for a new place to live.
Well, you pass that off as like, yeah, not much to report. I'm just going to move entirely where my body has been living for a while.
Totally does, without having a place to live on July 1st. I think I'm so casual about these things for a couple reasons. One, I've had extraordinary karma around finding places in my life. And I think after being nomadic for a couple years, I've got my rooftop tent. Like, I can be where I need to be and it'll all work out. I'm not really stressed about it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I moved 13 times during my childhood before I left home, and I know you've moved around a lot. And I've always been really interested in people who have stayed in the same house, or
Yeah.
maybe one or two houses. And um, psychologically, I've learned that at a really basic Abraham Maslow's hierarchy level, shelter is so important to us. And um, I've had to become more aware of why it's important to actually have a place that feels like home. And I also love the sense of flexibility where it doesn't rock my entire world to move. But that is on the list of things that causes a lot of stress up there with divorce and, losing a job. Changing houses actually does, can be destabilizing. So,
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that for me it's not, it is destabilizing in as much as you're moving and uplifting your life and uprooting your life. But I haven't it's funny, Jacob, when I mentioned when I landed in Santa Fe, I literally everything I own fit into my SUV. Like
hmm
that's how minimalistic my life had become. And so I moved into this casita and there was some furniture here, but not a ton. And I bought some things like chairs and a carpet and other stuff. And I was looking around the place. This was several weeks ago, and I'm just like, I don't want all this stuff. And literally, I have like 4 chairs. I don't have that much stuff in my life, but it all felt like a lot of stuff again and
mm,
not really what I was wanting. So I'm actually excited to do some house sitting again and to pare down my life while at the same time feeling like I am rooting here. I really like being in
mm,
Santa Fe. I was mentioning to you beforehand that because of the fires that have been happening here in northern New Mexico, they've closed all of the national forests, all of the hiking trails. Like you can't go anywhere here
mm,
outdoors and hike right now. And it's very frustrating. And I've had conversations with many people here, and to the person, we all feel like it's an absolutely extreme response to what's going on. Yes, these fires are tragic, and there are any number of trails that are okay for people to be hiking on. It
hmm
just is to
hmm
shut down an entire state's national forest system
mm,
just feels so extreme right
yeah,
now,
yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. It's
Well,
frustrating.
something you said a minute ago about having great karma around houses or places to live. Julia Cameron, who lives right there near you, she has always told me. In fact, when I was looking for a new place to live a couple of years ago, she said, "Well, the higher power seems to have a really special place in its heart for where we live, where we're going to be feeling safe." And that always stuck with me. And my little sister Kitty just had a situation where she had to move from a town a couple of hours away back to Boise, and that was causing her a lot of stress because Boise rental market and housing market in general is just really kind of insanity. And we were all saying our versions of prayers for her, and it something just came completely really hard to even believe what a great situation she got for an extremely affordable. Like now, I'm envious of her situation. So
Amazing. See, prayers
yeah.
work too.
Yeah, it's funny. I often, when I tell people I'm praying for them, I say something like I'm saying my version of prayers for you, because I grew up in a situation where prayer had a completely different, it was a different experience. And so I often feel a bit uneasy with the idea of prayer, even though I do it every day. And who I'm praying to and how I'm doing it is different now. But I have to say, Scott, that there is something about the connection to a vast, intelligent universe that I cannot deny. I've watched it work over and over in my life.
Yeah. So how I totally agree. And so how do your prayers look now when you say you do it in your way? Like, what does that mean for you?
Oh, it's weird, hippie, mystic freak kind of way.
Say more, please. I want more details.
Oh, well, I've had, and I think we maybe talked about this on a different episode. I've had an experience of being guided for a lot of years, and
Mhm.
in fact, I recently had reason to go looking for a story that I wrote called Surrender Avenue, and found it, and it appeared in a book called Heaven When Heaven Touches Earth with James Von Prague, Sonny Don Johnson, and Lisa McCourt. There's a book of all these chapters and stories, and I read that again the other day, and it brought tears to my eyes because it was one of those early experiences of feeling desperate and needing an answer quickly,
Yeah.
and being reminded to open my heart and mind and say, I need help, and then
Yeah.
watch for the help to appear. I'm going to put that on my website as an article soon, and I'll share it. But I've had that experience so many times, especially in the last decade, and that has retooled my willingness to engage with what we call prayer, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. All I've been thinking since you said Surrender Avenue was we're gonna rock down to Surrender Avenue. Oh, you might not even know that reference, do you?
No, definitely
I
not.
love that about you because you didn't have music for for your life, right? Until your 20s. That was a very, very popular song in the 80s. It
No
was a one-hit
shit.
wonder by Eddie Grant, but it was called Electric Avenue. And he would say, we're gonna
Oh,
rock down to Electric Avenue. Anyway, some people listening are gonna know that reference for sure.
no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. Prayer for me is energy. And I
Hmm.
I happen to believe in, a higher power. I believe in an energy out there that is imbuing all of us and created everything. So that's really what I see as
Hmm.
a higher power. And I happen to believe in guides and angels and non physical beings, those who have passed in our lives, who are watching over us. I connect to that. And for those who don't connect to that, if you just look at the power of prayer as energetic intention, you can be praying to yourself. You can be praying to the strength that lives within you to create in your life what it is you want to create. You can be praying to nature. If you get some sort of spiritual benefit from nature and you set prayers to nature, because for me, it's about being intentional about how we approach our lives. And
Hmm.
I see prayer as one more avenue of intention by which I can approach conscious living, and it feels good. Before I do any workshop, anything with people. Well, I say that, but I was doing it here in the beginning, but I didn't. I've forgotten to do that a lot of times before we go live. Just a simple prayer calling on all angels, guides, non-physical beings, source energy, that I may just come from a place of deep love and step
Hmm.
outside my mind and just be a channel for your wisdom and clarity.
Yeah.
And I feel held by that when
Hmm.
I remember to do it. And it helps me move into whatever I'm moving into. And whether or not something is happening tangibly, it helps me tangibly move into the experience feeling supported.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Yeah. Scott, I remember right as I was moving through the divorce process, and I had stepped out. I made the decision that I need to take one step out. I didn't know what was next at all, and my financial situation wasn't solid at all at the time, and I was really scared. How will I take care of my kids? How will I provide a reasonable path for my soon-to-be ex-wife to make a new life for herself and all that? And I definitely felt responsible for those things. So I moved into this little rental, shared room situation about a mile from where everyone else was living. And I remember one night, I remember writing in my journal, I I have a bedroom, a single bed mattress, a box of books in my backpack, and that was it in that room. And it was on the floor, this little bed. And it turned out later I realized, oh, this is like a children's mattress. My feet don't even, I'm not very tall, and my feet kind of hung off the end of this mattress. So talk about feeling destabilized. And I remember one night coming home and just feeling so burdened, like my stomach was hurting. And I curled up around that pain on that little mattress on the floor. And I said, much like you just said, I just said, Father, Mother, God, universe, angels, everything, and then just help. And that felt like this burst of energy leaving me, just going, help, I need help. And it was interesting. A few moments later, I got this sort of nudge. Helps on the way, but sit up and write, and write down what you need. And so I I did. I started writing that down, and I got this. Don't write down some fuzzy thing like I need abundance or enough. Write down exactly what you need. And that
Mm.
sometimes can be difficult for me to get that specific. So
Mm.
I wrote down the monthly number, and it seemed at the time it was like, yeah, whatever. That would be great, but and honestly, looking back, it wasn't very much. But um, and then the ideas started to flow, and I just started to write down like kind of a long bullet list of, oh, what about this, what about, suddenly I moved out of the freeze zone, on the polyvagal chart, and back through fight or flight and down into the green zone, where I was opening up to possibilities, to resources that were all around me already. But I think the act of that prayer helped me get there. And I'll skip forward a few weeks, and I got a call from Randy Davila, who I had met and worked with in Austin some, but I hadn't heard from for about a year. And he said, "Hey, bud, I'm thinking about hiring a marketing director, probably part time." He tried to keep it really low uh,
Mhm.
burden on himself at the time. And he said, "I just got a deal with Dr. Joe Dispenza to produce all of his events, and I know I'm going to need some help." So um, I felt this nudge, similar to the other nudges, that said, you gotta tell him what you need. And so I said, "Listen, I think you shouldn't try to do this part time with me. I'm willing to come on and really put myself into this." And I heard him kind of take his breath in, like, "Oh no, how much is it going to cost?" And I told him what the number was. I heard him kind of, Randy's such a good negotiator. I know he wouldn't have wanted me to hear the relief in his breath. He was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll get back to you on that." So he called me back the next day and said, "You know what? Let's do it. Let's do a 90-day probation and make sure it works for both of us." And I was in that job, Scott, with exactly the amount of money I had put down on my paper, um, for 7.5 years. And it was an incredible experience. And I felt so provided for. I felt like I had enough. It made everything possible that I'd been so afraid of before. So that's just one of many experiences I've had where, and I call them miracles, good things that happen that don't seem possible given the circumstances. There was no way I could have figured that out.
Yeah, I love that you referred to the nudges a couple times in that, because I think that's such an important part of that story as well, is not just that you received the nudges, but that you followed up on them. And I think that so often we're getting nudges from our inner being, from our inner wisdom, just
Mm-hmm.
like, go in this direction, think about doing this, send an email to this person. And
Mm-hmm.
so often we don't listen to those nudges,
Mm-hmm.
and it's when we do that these types of miracles can be created. So I would invite all of us to, to take in what Jacob just shared with us and to start paying more attention to our own lives as we move through the day, and see what kind of whispers are coming from, not from our minds, from
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else. And that doesn't even have to mean from your guides or from the angels, though it could be from there, but just from your inner knowing or your
Mm-hmm.
intuition.
Yeah.
Like, where is it directing you? And what happens if you just stop and give some energy to whatever it is it's asking you to give energy to, and see
Yeah.
where that leads? That's very powerful. I was listening to Lee. Are you friends with Lee Harris? Do you know Lee?
Yeah. You introduced us.
Okay, I thought so.
Yeah.
Okay, I
I
thought
love,
so. So
I
anyway,
love Lee.
Lee has a great podcast. It's called Impact the World, and he had Sark on, and I know you know Sark, and she's so lovely and delightful and wise. And I didn't even hear the whole episode, but one thing she was sharing that was really powerful and kind of related to what you were just talking about
Mm-hmm.
is just saying yes to what your gut is asking you to do. And she used the example of receiving from, she gets lots of people, she's written so many books, and she gets a lot of people writing to her for blurbs and for forwards. And this woman wrote her an email, and she said the whole email was just an apology. Like, the whole thing was just her hemming and hawing over what she was about to ask Sark. And finally, at the end, she was like, "So, what I would like to ask you is if you would be willing to write the foreword for my book." After nothing but an awkward paragraphs of apology, and Sark wrote back to her, "Yes, I will." And she said, in her point in telling this story was, you don't have to be graceful. You don't have to know exactly how to do it. If you're getting the nudge to do
Mhm.
something, give it a
Mhm.
shot, because
Yeah,
if you don't ask, you're never going to get the yes that you're looking for.
that's
And
right.
maybe 99 out of 100 people might have said no to the energy of that email, but Sark was the one she wanted, and Sark was the one who said, yeah, sure. So I felt
Yeah.
like that was such a powerful lesson.
God, I'm glad you brought her up. She is such a remarkable human. I'm actually going to be seeing her and her partner David in San Francisco next weekend.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, and her team just sent me the 25th year anniversary of her book Succulent Wild Woman that's coming back out, being re-released this year, and actually in about a week. Yes, she was telling me stories last time I was up in her magical little apartment on Telegraph Hill. She was telling me story after story, much like what we're doing right now, Scott. And I sat there with tears running down my face because watching, watching someone live a life of actual deep faith and not attached to a particular religious structure, but just, she told me stories as a young woman of taking miracle walks and having exactly the same kinds of things happen that I just shared about Surrender Avenue and the other one, over and over again. And she said, Jacob, I don't ever grow out of that. She said, I have a larger enterprise now. And of course, we still have times of cash flow needs and things. She said, I took a miracle walk the other day because I needed answers. And I love examples, real life examples of this.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who aren't aware of Sark, it's Sark, and she is just, if you need any sort of creative revitalization, energizing input, like she's so vibrant and she's
Yeah.
so energizing. Her work is just so uplifting, and she's really beautiful, and you can pick any of her many books to dive into. They're all so colorful and love filled and wise and beautiful. I used to work at a store when I moved to San Francisco. The year after I moved there, I got a job. I may have told this story, I don't know, I'll tell it again.
I want to
uh,
hear it again.
I I was in San Francisco. I was working at a law firm thinking I might want to become a law clerk. Quickly saw a lot of very unhappy lawyers and paralegals around me. This isn't a statement on lawyers. This was my experience. And I was becoming miserable. And this was my first job out of college. And I was living in San Francisco and partying and having a good time, but having this job that was making me miserable. And I thought, no, this is not going to be my experience of being an adult in the world. I'm not going to compromise my happiness for work, not in
Mhm.
this way. I quit the job, went to New England to teach at this literature program through the University of Michigan, which was extraordinary. Came back to San Francisco and needed to find a job, had no money, and was going to, do you know those, I don't know if you're aware of these, like it's like Greenpeace and Sierra Club. There were all these different groups that would hire anyone because the job was horrible. You had to knock on doors and ask people to sign petitions and then
Right.
ask them for money. And there was this one called Forest Forever. So I was scheduled that day to go out and start my job at Forest Forever, and I was dreading it because I had done these kinds of jobs before. And I said to myself that morning, if I can find any other job, it will keep me from having to go work at Forest Forever. So I went to Haight Ashbury that morning and went into every store and was asking if there were jobs available, and went into this store called Planet Weaver's Treasure Store. And it was this new age, beautiful gift shop that I was somehow unaware of. And to cut to the chase, I got a job there. And I didn't have to go to Forest Forever. And this was a really, really wonderful job. Oh my God, why am I telling this story? What were we even talking about? There
Well,
was a
hang on,
whole.
hang on though. You said to cut to the chase, and as you were leading me into Haight Ashbury,
Yeah.
in my imagination, because I love that area, I could smell the patchouli. I could see the weird stuff across the street. So don't cut this short. This is great.
Okay. And I really have no idea where it's leading. So I'll add in more details and see if it comes back to me. So Haight Ashbury, for those of you who don't know, that was like the summer of love. This was, you know, Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Starship, Jefferson Airplane at the time. I mean, so much was happening in this area of San Francisco in the 60s and has a lot of history. When I was living there in the 90s, it was a lot of people trying to sell you acid and mushrooms and pot on the street.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids who would come there, and I say this very intentionally because I do not think this is the choice of most people who are experiencing homelessness, but a lot of kids would come and
Hmm.
live on the street intentionally in Haight
Hmm.
Ashbury, especially over the summer months. So the homeless population there was in part people who certainly weren't choosing it, but then in part younger people who were coming from all over and just living in that area. So there was a lot of that energy, and you'd walk into this store, Planet Weavers, and it was like a sanctuary off of Haight Street. It smelled like more like Nag Champa, though Haight itself smelled a lot like patchouli. And there were people drumming in the corner, and there was world music playing, and all these beautiful smells and visuals and candles and books. And I still have no idea why I was telling this story. What were we even talking about beforehand?
Well, I'll tell you in just a moment.
Okay.
I think I could feel a connection in there, but it doesn't matter to me because again, Haight Ashbury is important to me. My mother was Scott there for 1969, right at the epicenter.
Are you serious? Like
Yeah,
living it?
yeah. Oh,
Oh,
yeah. She was right there. She would drop acid where she lived in Santa Rosa, hitchhike down to the city, and then she would hang out. She said, one time I dropped acid and woke up 3 days later in a hallway in Haight Ashbury. And one time, Carlos Santana and his band were driving down the road and picked her and her girlfriend up on as hitchhikers, and they drove into the city playing trumpets out the window and throwing firecrackers out the window and stuff. So
this is
that
shocking given what I know about your upbringing. I did not know this about your mother.
Yeah, no, she's a marvelous, crazy human. And I was born in Santa Rosa, about an hour from there. So that whole area has some real heart energy for me. And whenever I go back, I always have to go back to Haight Ashbury and go to the weird sock store and buy people weird socks from there. So
Yeah, same. That was a big part of my 20s was spent working on Haight Street, living around Haight Street, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was an absolutely spectacular time. And we sold lots of Sark books. I was in charge of the book section, so I came to know Sark's books
hmm.
very well in the 90s. But there was a greater point to that, and I
Well,
don't
we
know
were
what it
talking about synchronicity and whatever we call miracles and feeling guided and nudged into a direction that's going to be supportive of us, you know?
And maybe it was, Jacob, the experience of getting the job on Haight Street in this store. When I walked in, I remember this so vividly. When I walked into the store and took it in and looked around, everything in my body lit up. And I
Mm.
remember saying to the woman, "Are you taking applications?" And she looked at me and she smiled with this huge smile and she said, "We're always taking applications." And I filled out the application and went right up and interviewed with the manager and the owner. And as I was walking out of the store, by the time I got home, she called me and she's like, "It's yours if you want it." You
Mm.
know, there was maybe it'll come to me. There's still more to it, but that was and that's the job that ultimately led me to being involved in a cult because most of the people there were. But
Well, this whole conversation, I can't believe where this has taken us so far because we talked for a second before we started recording about another topic, but I'm really happy this is happening right now. I feel like so many people need miracles, and I feel like so many people are uncomfortable, or if they believe in some version of outreach to the universe, they don't know how to experience it. And so I feel like sometimes the act of telling stories, our own stories, for me, I don't believe in prayer. I live it. I experience it.
yeah.
It's no longer a belief. And I think that characterizes how I live my life in general, Scott. If I say I believe something, there's this automatic click in my head that says, not you shouldn't believe it. It's can I experience it? So it can no longer just be a belief. Can I move this into a knowing? So it's now mine, because a belief is actually somebody else's. It's it and as Wayne Dyer said, this was so influential for me 15 years ago when I first heard it. He said, every belief contains within it the seed of doubt because it's not yet been proven. Once you've experienced it and experimented with it and practiced it, it becomes yours. So it's no longer a question of, is this possible? Or I just believe it's true.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll give you an example of that. A child, a little kid standing on the edge of the pool at swim lessons, watching the other kids swim. It's like, well, I believe swimming's possible. I can't swim. I'm still afraid of swimming.
Hmm.
And so the swim coach comes over and says, "Come here, hon. Let's get in the water." And the kid's freezing and shaking and stuff. And like, I can't do it. And he's like, "Yeah, I can do it. And you can do it. Here, let me hold you up." And then the kid splashes around and starts to do a little bit of it. And this story gives us a couple of clues. One is, once that child begins to swim a little bit and then a little bit more, it's no longer a belief. It's in their cells. I can
Hmm.
swim. And it also points to the very legitimate role of guides and teachers in our lives. Scott, you and I have both had experiences of unquestioned belief in a guru or a guide or a shaman
Hmm.
or something,
Hmm.
and had to experience the pain of watching that dissolve. Um, and so for a long time, I didn't want to hear from anybody who was a leader or a teacher. It's like, this is just bullshit. But there is a very distinct role, legitimate role for guides and teachers in our lives. And that's because the guide holds the knowing and helps to transmit the knowing to the student. But that's where it needs to end, because, and many guides who want to, feed their ego with their teachings don't know how to transfer the power back to the student, who, and it's like, you have the same stuff that I have. It's not just, it does not live. I don't own this.
Absolutely, 100%. So I'm curious, to everyone listening, because I love when you said you live your prayer, you don't believe in it, you live it. But to those listening who are like, I'm not experiencing miracles, that's not my
Hmm.
reality,
Hmm.
what do you recommend they do to open themselves up to the energy of living into that more readily?
I spent some time with A Course in Miracles, Scott, and I didn't go through the entire thing. It's 600 pages or something, but I got into it and began to practice it for a while. And I think at the time it really helped me because it did have some Christian-y kind of sounding language, but it was so different
Mhm.
from what I grew up in. But there was some familiar language in there. But the very first principle in A Course in Miracles is, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. All expressions of love are maximal. And that one sat strangely with me for a long time, because I would wait until something was really desperate in my life before I would say, I need help.
Mhm.
And just this year, I was journaling and asking for help. Um, and then the next day, something amazing happened, a miracle. And I was back in the coffee shop with tears in my eyes saying, thank you. I can't believe this happened. And the guide spoke through my pen saying, um, absolutely. 100%. You're worthy of this, support that you needed. And Jacob, you wait too long.
Mm.
The tiniest flicker of anxiety for you is an opportunity for a miracle. You think there's an order of difficulty. You think that check that you needed to come and didn't know where it was coming from, and then it showed up from a source that completely didn't make sense to you, but it was there. You think that's a miracle. It is, but not. That's not the only thing. Your next breath is a miracle. The meeting you're going into that you feel insecure about, to say I need help going into this, that's its own version of miracle. And so I've been practicing that more and more. And they just said, all we're saying is, be willing whenever you feel anxiety to say, oh, this seemingly small thing I could use help in. And they said, just begin living that way and see what happens. Experiment.
I love that so much. I love that you said you don't ask early enough, or whatever they told you, or you ask too
Mhm.
late, because this is really powerful. I love this conversation too, because it's a reminder to me. I forget to ask all the time.
Hmm.
I truly do. And yet I have so many examples in my life that have shown me when I do ask, I am more likely to receive.
Hmm.
And I would encourage everyone listening, to really look at, are you asking for what you need in your life? Are you asking for what you want in your life? Are you putting it down on paper? Are you being specific with it? Are you opening yourself up to the realization of that which you seek to create in your life? Are you holding space for it with visualization? Are you actually seeing yourself living into the thing that you want to create in your life and that you're asking for? In my own experience, I feel like there are sometimes energetic barriers I've created by
Hmm.
asking for something while at the same time holding absolute disbelief that I'll ever get it.
Yes.
Which and all that does in my experience is it creates a wall to the possibility of creating what I want to create. But can we, if we're embracing this whole concept of miracles,
Hmm.
can we, while we're asking, even if we have no idea how this thing will come to realization, can we hold ourselves open to the understanding that miracles exist beyond our capacity to understand how things are going to work out?
Yeah.
And can we just stay open to the possibility of it being created and
Right.
see what happens from that place?
I've talked about Jill Bolte Taylor's book that I just finished reading, Whole Brain Living.
I have to read it. I was just listening to someone else talk about it on some, I don't even remember. I think Martha Beck was talking about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I loved about this, Scott, is she's like, look, here's a neuroscientist. She's a scientist, loses half the capacity of her brain. Like all of her left brain function is gone because of a stroke. And as a scientist, much like Viktor Frankl, as a psychologist in the death camps, observing his own experience and having the mind to be able to document what's going on. And so she went through the process of recovery and documented, and that's what led to some really breakthrough understandings for her. But here's the reason I'm bringing this up. She's like, we think of ourselves as maybe having a left brain and a right brain. She said we have four main parts of our brain, and there's the prefrontal, highly developed human brain, and then there's the lower brain, the amygdala. And she's like, that's also split in half. So we have four characters in our brain. She said most of us are constantly living in the left half, the character one, which is the highly logical, realistic, goal oriented, achievement oriented, that all that stuff. And she said, what's interesting is during my experience of recovering from stroke, I did not experience any of that because it was not available to me. She said, I didn't even know where I ended and anyone else or the world began. She said, I was just this vast energy. And she said, as I began to regain left brain function, I actually was concerned. I didn't know how I would fit this vast energy I am back into the body, back into the limitation of being, myself in this personality. And you often say things like, we are boundless, we are energy, all these things. And I loved reading this book because it actually put more framework around that. She said the character four, which is the lower brain on the right side, she said that is where we experience our connectedness to all things. It is where that's the observer part of our machinery. It sees everything equally. It holds everything equally in love and in compassion and in interest, curiosity. Um, the reason I'm bringing this up is that I feel like because most of us are so conditioned to live in from other parts of ourselves, that's the part that doubts. That's the part that doesn't know it's connected. It does feel isolated and it does feel disconnected from other people. And so for me, I love having scientific framework put around some of these experiences
Mhm.
only because it takes care of that part of my brain that's like, oh man, this is weird shit,
I know, and it's funny. I don't need I love that. I love that you love the scientific framework, and I really love that you offer it here in
Yeah.
different doses. I don't need it. I
Mm-hmm.
just I am I but I do appreciate it actually. But I also just I'm getting better at paying attention to my life,
Mm-hmm.
to watching. And I really, again, if you're listening and if you're if you're in resistance at all to this whole idea of miracles and nudges and in any of that, great, it's totally fine. And play with it.
Hmm.
Get curious. Curiosity
Hmm.
is one of my favorite words
Yeah.
because I think so often we bring to the spiritual path and to our growth the energy of work.
Hmm.
And I know I've done that, and I use work as a way of describing the path all the time.
Hmm.
But what happens if you just get in more comfortable relationship with your curiosity and allow that to be the driving force? Like, what happens if you approach this whole miracle thing as an experiment for
Hmm.
a week? Like, for a week, decide, I'm going to ask
Hmm.
for what it is I want. I'm going to hold myself open to the possibility of it being created. I'm going to give myself over to the potential of miracles in my life. And over the course of that week, just pay attention, not only to what gets manifested, but also to how you feel. I think
Hmm.
so often
Hmm.
we are consumed with the actual manifestation of what we
Right.
want, and it steers us away from how we're actually feeling in our being. And I
Hmm.
can, and what I mean by that is, I would rather live a week in this kind of joyful curiosity about what it is I want to create than
Hmm.
have the creation for the minute that I have the creation, because ultimately the only reason I want the creation is so that I feel more joyful in my
Right.
body. So why not just jump to the joy immediately, or the excitement or the curiosity, and create more and more of that in our lives, because
Right.
that's what we're seeking anyway.
I love that you pointed out that you don't need all the logical framework around things. I love that about you, Scott. And actually, if you end up reading the book, she said you're going to notice characters in your life who are living more from one of those centers than the other. And she said, by the way, we're all meant to. She said, my motive for writing this book is that we have immense power if we begin to live as a whole creature. She's like, I'm not saying that the character 4 that's connected to all things is better than character 1. She said, what I want to do is help people understand, oh my God, we're so powerful when we know how to
Yes.
interact with all of them. But you are one of those people who, as I'm reading this book, I'm going, oh, well, Scott's a character 4, that he's dominantly character 4. Like he's just, oh.
Well, thank you. Thank you for seeing me that way. I hope I can live into your vision of me, Jacob, or
Well, no, I
continue
mean,
to.
and it's, I probably am more that way than some of the other ways as well. As I was thinking about the 4 oldest kids in my family, and which ones we represent, it was like, oh, well, this one's that one, and that one's that one, and then watching as we grow and develop together, watching how we all are gaining more of that sense of wholeness. And I just want to say too that you're an example. Lee Harrison is an example. Stark's an example of people who do have this deep connection and a sense of wholeness in the universe, and want to live and generally do from a place of love, more of the time. But that does not exclude being highly accomplished and getting amazing things done in this world, and actually creating things that require linear work and that sort of thing. So I just want to say, I feel like I've always been fascinated by human potential, Scott, all ever since I was a child. And that's one of those clues for me. Like whenever someone's saying, what's my purpose? How do I, it's like, well, let's go back and look at the breadcrumbs you've dropped, like Hansel and Gretel along the way. Like you've been leaving clues about what really turns you on. But that was one of the earliest questions, being raised a Christian kid. I asked my father, who is highly intellectual, studied Greek and Hebrew so he could read the old text. I remember going back to him as a child saying, hey, where in the Bible it says Jesus said, um, somebody was marveling over a miracle, and he said, listen, great, you're going to do greater works than these. Just live into your potential. Essentially, he didn't use those words. And I went to my dad and said, hey, so we believe the Bible, right? And Dad said, oh, well, yes. And I said, well, what about this part? And I just watched the confusion on his face. And I was kind of like alarmed that I had actually stumped my dad because he was so smart with the Bible and everything. But that was one of those early questions. I must have been like 8 or 9 years old. And I was always asking those kinds of questions, not because
Mhm.
I was, dissenting from the faith. It was just like, hang on, it says this. Do we actually believe that? And that's been one of those clues along the way for me, Scott, because I've always wanted to know, can we be and experience and do much more than we commonly think is possible? And I'm seeing it happen.
Absolutely. I mean, there are countless examples of that. And, I love that we're talking about this because I feel like for me, this also comes back to looking at yourself honestly, not you, the
Hmm.
collective you,
Hmm.
getting clear about the tools that help you to move forward in your life. And if you need like scientific backup, let's say,
Hmm.
to get you to explore some avenue in the world of spirituality or healing, by
Yeah,
all means take a dive into it.
do it.
Because it's like different things work for different people. Jacob, it's so funny because I've been doing a lot of breath work,
Hmm.
guiding a lot of breath work. And every time I try or every time I dive into reading about breath work from a scientific perspective, I retain none of it.
Wow.
None. It's like I can read it and I can't recite back anything I'm reading. And I feel like it is life telling me this is not necessary. Everything you have experienced in breathwork has nothing to do with any sort of scientific explanation for it.
Right.
It is not how you're showing up when you're guiding, it is not what you're offering. And because I want to feel like more well rounded and like I can talk about it from
Sure.
this intellectual scientific point of view, and I can't remember anything. And
Right.
none of the breath work is any less profound, and
Right.
adding a scientific understanding to it is not going to make me communicating with my dead parents more profound during a breathwork session. Do you know what I'm saying?
I
And so
do.
for me, I don't need that, and for
Hmm.
for others we do. And I think
Hmm.
so much of this spiritual path, as I call it, is just getting honest with yourself, like
Hmm.
not judging yourself for your needs, not if you do need scientific background and backup, not thinking there's anything less about
Hmm.
needing that, or if you're somebody who's just like, I'm just flowing with the vibes and watching and feeling, there's nothing wrong with that either. Like, who are you in the story? And
That's
honor
right.
that and feed that and follow that curiosity,
Right.
because I think so often we're cutting ourselves off by the ways in which we're
Hmm.
judging ourselves and how we feel we need to be showing up, instead of just honoring how we're naturally showing up.
Well, look, yeah, and once again, that is, man, you're just really nailing it today, Scott. I mean, you do, but today you're really nailing it. Uh, no, in this book, Whole Brain Living, that is one of the practices she teaches, which is what she calls a brain huddle. And she's like, listen, if you're feeling anxious or limited or whatever stuck, she said, what I want to teach you to do is become more reflexive, to have a brain huddle and say, what does that part need? So I'm going to relate that to my experience. I came to a point of saying that anything that cannot be doubted, as hard as it can be, does not deserve to stand. So I developed a tremendous skepticism in my life, and
Say that
anything that,
again, though, for people to hear it again.
yeah, anything that someone's asking you to believe that cannot be doubted as hard as possible and still survive, it doesn't deserve to stand. It doesn't deserve to survive. Like, I want people to be as skeptical and doubting as they possibly can be. And if that, because that's how I live my life. I don't just take a thing because someone posted a meme about it, Deepak Chopra or anybody else, like, oh yeah, that's truth. It's like, well, it sounds good. Can I know that it's truth for myself? Can I actually experience it? And I feel like that's one of the big shifts we're going through collectively.
Mhm.
As we let go of things like unquestioned belief in certain religions or whatever, is I feel like we're being asked to become more empowered as individuals to say, I want to live into my potential, into the best possible life I can. I want to be more loving, live in the better world, that I see possible. And I want to only give the precious energy and time of my life to things that I can experience, that I can know for sure are true, because I'm willing to experiment with them. And the old model was, no, the priest said this, you have to do it, or the guru
Yeah.
said this, you have to do it. You know.
Yeah. And there's an extreme happening around that, which is I see these words a lot on social media, which is
Mm-hmm.
question everything. And I understand the energy behind those words because we have just accepted so much in our world from the media, from politicians, from ad agencies, from everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
without questioning much of it, which is what you're speaking to. So I understand that there's more personal responsibility and empowerment in the questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, Jacob, like, I'm not interested in living a life where I'm questioning everything. That's not what I'm seeking. Truly, it's like I'm seeking to be more aware that I am not going to accept what's fed to me at face value anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, rather than questioning everything,
Mm-hmm.
I am working at being more conscious about what I'm choosing to engage with, because I don't want to choose to engage with organizations, corporations, beings whom I feel I have to question constantly. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and obviously we live in a society, so it's impossible to extract yourself completely from the powers that be. And there's always going to be reason to question the powers that be. But at the same time, I invite us all to look at the choices we're making and where our energy is going. And if we're constantly engaging in relationships, situations, circumstances where we feel like we have to question every single thing,
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's like a little bit of a siren and a red flag. Like, hey, wait
Agreed.
a minute,
Yeah.
is this
Well,
really where you want to be giving your energy?
yeah, and I'm so glad you questioned my point there.
No,
No,
but I agree with your point also 100%.
no, we're actually really on the same. It's so interesting, Scott, because I was up in the high mountains with Stephen Farmer over the weekend. It was such a great experience, and we were having these kinds of conversations the whole time. It was so much fun, and told filthy jokes and stuff too. But um, just to make sure we're all keep it down on the earth here. But I was telling him a story about going to my father because I'm wired to be more mystical.
Mhm.
And I would go to him with an experience of something that didn't quite fit into the Christianity that we were part of, and I saw him as more of a skeptic, and he would. So I would go to him and say, "Okay, I have this question or this experience," and looking back at it, it was I had a mystical experience of some kind, and he felt more accessible to me than the leaders of the church and stuff. So I'd go to him, and I would watch his really powerful intellect. It what the word picture I would use is it felt like I showed up with a bunny in my hand, and
Oh,
he threw it into a wood chipper. So I would go away because he was using his left brain intellect to
yeah,
try to analyze it, to try to break it all
yeah,
down. And it was like I would go away and go, oh, I mean, he's smart, but that just did violence to an actual experience that I just wanted to compare notes with and talk about.
yeah,
And watching my father live his life like that with the idea of question everything, I love that. And what I've noticed is people who use that as kind of their main support, they often are limiting themselves from even having any experiences because they need to front load it with so much intellectual information.
yeah,
And so they actually do violence to experiences they could have that could open up the fullness of life to them in some way. And um, going back to the whole brain living, what I love, and you said it, I just want to reiterate it. Um, Going back to that, my brother Nate is a highly intellectual, similar personality to my dad, and watching him come through the long process of, you know, coming up against pain in his life and pulling those threads and coming through the intellectual process and then saying, "Oh my God, Jake, we're actually really on the same page with this stuff." And he said it took me longer because I had to go through this slower process of running it through the intellect first. And so I would just say that by taking care of the intellectual part of myself, by saying, okay, I'm willing to, so like I was willing to go have a shamanic experience in 2007 that fucking changed my life. Um, And then I spent the next decade researching and saying, okay, what happened there? Was that just drugs, or was there more to it? And of course, I found out there was so much more to it. And that, then I don't feel the need to keep researching, the effects of DMT on the brain. It's like, no, I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that people are continuing to do that. But I would just say that to the degree that I need a little bit of support for that part of myself so it can relax enough. It goes, okay, you're not just going to ask me to swallow things whole. You are going to come back and take care of me. To that degree, it tends to relax and says, okay, good, go do your crazy fucking stuff. And then I know you're going to come back and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, and also, if your brother Nate lives the rest of his life being completely intellectual about everything, and that feels okay for him, that's beautiful too.
Totally.
We all have different personalities. We're all driven to different ways of experiencing this
Mhm.
life, and I think that for me, so much of what it's about now is just bringing grace to who I am,
Right.
who I am as this personality in this lifetime,
Mhm.
instead of shaming the aspects of myself that I'm inclined to shame, just being like, no, you too are welcome here. You
Right.
too have a home here. Because what that does is it just creates so much more peace, so much more ease, so much more compassion and love in our beings. And I really believe deeply that no matter where your personality steers, we're all seeking more peace. We're all seeking more joy. We all want to feel better about
Mhm.
ourselves and our place in the world.
Right.
And that can come to any personality
Right.
who is willing to just accept themselves in a deeper way.
Scott, I know we're coming to the end of time here. Boy, that sounded kind of apocalyptic.
In more ways than one, right? We're coming to
We're
the end of time.
coming to the end of our time together for this episode. No, I just wanted to say, you and I had intended maybe to talk about, gun stuff and abortion stuff or whatever. And I just want to say that I'm glad. I cannot believe how this conversation unfolded today. And I just want to say, all of us who desire a world, I just, I think as we look around, all of us, no matter what our background, we would say, in my definition of a miracle, something good that happens when it doesn't seem possible given the circumstances. I would say that we're all living in a world where most of us here would love to see something good happen, would love to see a bunch of good things happen. And whenever I post something and people, sometimes people come back with a lot of snark or a lot of skepticism, like, oh, well, that's just dreaming. It's like, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And let me just ask us all together to say, what good thing would you love to have happen in this world that seems impossible right now? Are you willing to hold that with Scott and me, whatever it might be, less violence, more understanding between people, more reasonable conversation so we can work together and make something happen? Like, I don't feel at all interested right this minute in diving into all the complexities of and then how impossible real change seems to be. I would say, what if curiosity question, creative question, what if what if it were possible for more of this to happen? What if it were more possible for it to happen more in my own home and my own connections in my community? What would that world look like? What if I could do a little bit more of that right now? What's a smaller level miracle? If we're going to talk about orders of difficulty, what would be a miracle that you need to have happen in your relationships at work or with your partner or your children? What would that miracle look like? Maybe our minds can't quite grasp the magnitude of, a seemingly really large miracle in this world. But I think we're in a world that is hungry, hungry, starving for real miracles. You know what? I want to be part of that.
Hallelujah, brother. I think that's a beautiful way to end. I'm with you.
Okay, and you have something coming up end of June,
Oh, thank you. Yes, yes,
and I
yes.
do. So you talk about yours first.
Okay, so I am offering a workshop on June 25th, Saturday. It's and it's available to the Europeans and the UKers listening because it's early enough that you can be a part of this one too.
Hmm.
It's called Coming Home to Yourself, and it's a self-discovery and self-love workshop. So we're gonna I do this in all my workshops, but it's basically about getting honest with ourselves and looking at the ways in which we can become our biggest cheerleaders, more in deeper relationship, deeper love with who we are,
Mm.
and express that in the world, and trust that by doing so we are serving everyone in our lives in the world on the whole, because self-love always transcends self. And it's a 3-hour workshop. There's going to be some writing exercises, some discussion, and me talking plenty. And then there's the option to add out on an hour of breath work at the end of the workshop, which I hope you choose that option, because it's going to be really, really deep after 3 hours working together. So that's on the 25th. And then every Tuesday night, I have my online breath and belonging still going on. And I'll share links to both of those. And that's an hour-long breath work session on Tuesday evenings.
You got me all tingly thinking I probably need to attend that full workshop, especially with the breath work at the end. So, and I have, fortunately, it's not on the same day. Yours is June 25th, right?
Yeah, it's a Saturday.
Okay. So I have on the 28th a very special microdosing teacher and practitioner doing an introduction to microdosing plant medicines, and that'll be on June 28th, and I'll put a link to that. But I'm really excited about Casey and her work because she is so focused on integration, Scott,
Mm.
and supportive practice in life,
Yeah.
including many of the things we talk about here all the time, journaling and meditation and walks in nature. She's like, one of the biggest problems with microdosing and all the hype that's out there is people show up expecting something really dramatic quickly. They've been struggling with anxiety, depression, different things, and they think that, okay, I'm going to start doing these little doses of psilocybin or something, and it's going to change everything quickly.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do the rest of the other parts of the integration. And so she's going to be sort of busting some of those myths a bit, and also then opening up the tremendous healing that's available to people. So I'm so excited to share her and her work as well.
Beautiful. I've never microdosed, but have several friends who have and have had really beautiful experiences with it. That's awesome. I love that you're offering that.
Well, I've always gone for macro dosing. Let's go to the heroic side of
Give me
it.
the biggest dose possible, please.
So I suspect I'll learn some things from this too, because I had a psilocybin experience a couple years ago. Actually going up to the desert this fall with my friend Luke Rathke, who was there during the initiation thing. In fact, he was the one who invited me. So he went on and became an actual practitioner. So I'm going. My whole body is like shaking a little bit because these can be really big experiences. But anyway, I'm going to be doing that this fall with Luke, and I'm excited about that. But I do remember a psilocybin thing I had a couple of years ago that was I went back and looked. This is kind of what I do, Scott. So I did the thing. I did
Wow.
5 grams of mushrooms. I thought, well, it seems like a lot, but later I went and looked it up because I had quite the experience. I went and looked it up and it said, oh yeah, anything above like 3.5, we call that the Timothy Leary dose. This is
Uh-huh. That's a lot of mushrooms.
turns out it's a lot.
It
So
turns out it's a lot. You're hardcore.
I talked to my brother about that. And he's like, fucking Jesus, dude, this is what you do. You just jump right off the cliff. And then later you go and look back and say, what did I do?
Before we close out, I just want to acknowledge also we've received a lot of
Oh, yeah.
submissions from listeners in the past couple weeks with really thoughtful emails about gun violence, about abortion, and
Yeah.
I appreciate not everyone agreed with what we had to say, and some
Yeah.
did, and I just we really want to just acknowledge all of you who've written in, and thank you for doing that. And also just invite you to continue writing in with your feelings, with your thoughts, and also with specific questions if you have them, things you'd like us to address directly. And as always, if you're loving the show, please let people know by rating it and reviewing it if you feel called to. Even a sentence is really helpful to me and Jacob, and we're very grateful for it. So
Yeah. And I just gave Scott full admin access to our website today. We've been doing this for over a year, so I feel like I can trust him to log in and,
yeah,
stuff.
I can read your submissions on my own. I don't have to
That's
wait
right.
for Jacob to send them to me.
Yeah, like I was the priest before, and suddenly, anyway.
Exactly.
Anyway, but I want to invite you. I love reading those, and if you want to
Me
visit,
too. Big
Scott
fan.
just talked about rating and reviewing on the listening apps. Please do that. It actually really does help a lot, and the algorithms out there look at that stuff, and the more that you rate and review, the more that it puts that in other people's feeds. So But visit Hey Jacob Hi Scott. Did I say that right? HeyJacobHiScott.com. And there's a message form. So please keep those coming. I love them. And I love your heartfelt, like Scott just said, I love your heartfelt expressions of support, but also you telling us your stories about what's going on in your life. And, Scott, I'm just going to hold, I'm sure you're with me on this. Let's just hold the energy, the space open for whatever we call miracles to start happening. I want to hear people's stories about stuff that they're experiencing.
Beautiful. Hallelujah. All right. Love you, listeners. Love you, brother.
Love you, my friend.
It's up to you to choose how good it can get, how much love you can let into your life, into your heart, before your mind decides it's too much. It's up to you to choose. It's up to you to choose.